We're going to talk a little bit more about sculpting today and go a little bit more in depth into some of the tools and what have you. So first of all, I'm just going to add a plane, something to play on, scale it up a bit. Now I'm not going to subdivide this plane because I want to point something else out to you. So if we look at that, it is just 4 vertices, a single plane. So let's go across to sculpting. Now if I try to sculpt on this, nothing's going to happen unless I grab a very corner where one of the vertices is, and you might see slight movement there. Let's Control Z back a couple of times. Okay, that's because there is no geometry for this to work on, and sculpting actually works by displacing the vertices. So you do need sufficient geometry to be able to sculpt. However, there is a tool in Blender called DynoTopo, which, to be honest, I don't like using. But we'll go through it. A lot of tutorials recommend using it. What DynoTopo does, we're just going to enable it, and we'll probably get an error message, or a warning message, not an error message. Always get this, just click OK. DynoTopo will actually add geometry as you're sculpting. So, let me just get a slightly bigger brush here. I'll turn the symmetry off, and if we look here, it's adding geometry. If we look at this in modeling now, you can see it's added all this geometry. But where we have to be careful, I just did 3 strokes there, and I went from one face to 4,000 in 3 strokes. So it quickly piles up, and it's not suitable for upload to game. In actual fact, I believe I said last week as well that sculpting in general is not suitable for direct upload. It's a great tool, and we can use it, but we need to go through a process called retopology afterwards, and we'll cover retopology next week. So let's just kind of finish out with sculpting this week. So DynoTopo, not very good in my opinion, because it just really adds on geometry. Okay, so let's delete that. Let's add a new plane. Let's scale it up a bit so we can see what we're working with, and this time I'm going to subdivide it. So let's right click and subdivide, and let's have some keys showing here. Okay, I'm going to give it about 100 cuts. There we go. Let's go into sculpting. So now with the DynoTopo turned off, okay, we've got a face count of 10,000. Yes, I know that's a lot higher than the 4,000 we had, but this isn't going to change. It's going to be 10,000 no matter what we do. Okay, so we've got some predictability with this. Okay, once again, 10,000 faces is way too much for an object. We'd have to retopo it, retopologize it, which we'll cover next week. Right, okay. Now a lot of people have been interested in the new cloth brush, and it's, once again, it's a very kind of, to me, it's an unpredictable tool. It's you can't really have much control over it. It all kind of bunches up and then suddenly stops. Okay, but if we look at this, Control Z backwards, apart from the red kind of brush, we got this white circle around it. And what happens with the cloth brush is it will only work within that white circle. Okay, so for example, I'm going to put my white circle about halfway up the object, and as I draw down, you see how it kind of stops, and we get a red warning now saying, hey, we've gone too far, it's not going to work anymore. Okay, not very realistic. I haven't yet found a way to change the relationship between the white circle and the brush. If we increase the strength, the circle gets bigger. If we decrease it, the circle gets smaller. It seems to be a fixed ratio. I haven't yet found a way that we can kind of control that. So what we got to do is, when we're sculpting, we got to kind of remember where this white boundaries are and kind of sculpt between that and kind of build up what we're looking for there. And once again, I'd recommend doing this in small steps. Okay. Now, it's all looking jagged, and it will do, because although we got 10,000 faces on this object, it's not enough to give us detail. Okay. So one thing we can do is we can add a subdivision surface modifier, and we can turn those up. 2 should work. We see where we're getting a lot smoother. Another thing we could do here actually is go into layout. Let's shade this smooth and go back to sculpting. See, it's looking a lot smoother. Okay, so what I would do in this instance is I would complete my model, the sculpting on it. I would bake textures and all that kind of thing, and then I would, after I've got my textures, I would delete the modifier, and the textures will apply to the lower poly model. So it's basically high poly baking to low poly. Let's add that subdivision surface again. Let's turn that to 2 both ways. Now if I was to turn this up, this is going to depend on your computer, but you can see how it's kind of starting to lag, and there I've got a blue circle. Your computer can only handle so many faces. By turning this up to 4, I'm now up to 2 million faces, and then when I try to sculpt, I'm just going to lag out completely, and this is probably going to freeze while I'm doing that. And I think what I'm going to do now, because in the past this is frozen for several minutes, is I'm just going to pause while this is trying to do its calculations. Oh, there it came. Right. So introducing too many faces or too many levels of subdivision is not always a good thing. It can really lag you out. And even at 2, even with this subdivision, you can see it's a bit laggy, but I tend to leave mine about 2. If you've got a much better computer than mine, you can probably get away with higher. I can't. And the one more thing about the sculpt brush. So let's go back to the tools. Is once you press a button and move, the circle seems to disappear and you kind of lose track of where you were. So what I found is if you go to stroke and you change the stroke method from space to line, okay, and what this will do is it'll now draw a line at the length of your stroke, so you can actually see how far you're stroking this, how far it's going. And then it just works. So I actually find this a more kind of accurate method of using the cloth brush, is by changing the stroke method to line. What else can we talk about? Right, okay. As we zoom out, you see the brush gets bigger in relation to the object. So if you're working with like a, well, actually, let's do it. Let's delete that. Let's add a UV sphere. Let's scale it up. Let's subdivide that a bit. Let's give us more geometry somewhere about there. And let's shade that smooth. Kind of a rough sphere, but Anyway, so let's go to sculpting. Let's go to our brush. And okay, so if we were trying to drag down, as we zoom out, okay, our brush gets a lot bigger in relation to the object. Alright, if we wanted to keep our brush the same size in relation to the object, we can change the spacing distance from view to scene. Okay, so you see my circle basically encompasses the sphere at the moment. If I zoom out, I need to do this up here. That's why it went wrong. I was wondering what was going wrong there. The radius unit, the radius of the brush, we can change to scene. So once again, we can see the relative size of that. Let's change that to scene. As I zoom in and out, the brush remains the same size relative to the object. So for example, I would need to make this quite a bit. Made it way too big, I think. There we go. Down a bit more. Okay, the brush remains constant to the object and not to the view. Okay, so that's another thing to bear in mind. Okay, let's go back into sculpt mode. Some of this will go through in the next video, I think, but those are kind of like the couple of bits I wanted to get out straight away. So when working with the cloth brush, I do find line a lot easier to handle, a lot easier to control. Just playing around now. So hopefully these will help you.